Life, culture, and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
I wonder if you ever think about serving God in mission in some of the more difficult places around the world. Sometimes you might think that serving in mission might be easy if it was on a tropical island, but what if you were in the middle of West Africa? Well, Mal Watts is joining us to talk about his family's experience. He's recently returned from Burkina Faso, where he was using his background in finance to serve with the mission organisation SIM. Mal and his family first went to Burkina Faso about 15 years ago, and Burkina Faso, one of the poorest countries in the world. And, of course, the idea of sharing the gospel is a very strong motivation, and it's what motivates Mal Watts. Mal's joining us now. Hi, Mal. Welcome along to 2020.
Thanks very much, Neil.
Mal, you're back after 15 years in Burkina Faso, and at this time your children are at a point where they need to be in an Australian school, I guess. Is that the reason for your return?
That's part of the reason, Neil. It's also that SIM Australia really wanted someone with field experience to be working in finance in their national office. And so they asked us if we'd consider coming to Sydney to work in the SIM national office here in Penshurst.
So is that a bit of a culture shock returning from Burkina Faso after all these years?
It was a huge culture shock, and someone described it like this, that for our girls coming to Australia was like it was when my wife and I first left Australia to go to Burkina. It was a very difficult choice, but and a lot of culture shock that we're still getting used to.
Well, Burkina Faso, I suppose the first thing for listeners that are not so familiar geographically with the location of Burkina Faso, it's in West Africa, but how do you describe it when people say, oh, where is that?
I say Burkina Faso is in that lump on the left-hand side of the north part of Africa. It's north of Ghana and south of Mali, right in the middle there of that West African part of the African continent.
I mentioned it was one of the poorest countries in the world,
Yep.
but when you actually work out just how poor, there is a human development index that these sorts of poverty levels are measured on.
Yep.
Where does Burkina Faso sit on the poverty index?
Yeah, well, it is one of the poorest countries in the world, Neil, and it's actually number 183 out of 188, so it's pretty much near the bottom of the Human Development Index.
Okay, and so for an Aussie family turning up in one of the poorest countries in the world, what does that feel like when you experience the sort of cultural change from Australia to Burkina Faso?
It's a bit of a shock, honestly, Neil, and, I think it took us time to get used to the fact of seeing poverty and homelessness and people struggling in life. But one of the things that really surprised us is that over time, a lot of the people there are not that much different to people here. They're trying to make a living and get their kids in school and look after their families. So although the differences are very stark at first, after a while you can see that in many ways they're not so different at all.
Sometimes we think about the motivations of what might lead someone to go to a mission context, and sometimes we think it's preachers with messages of the gospel that are going into some of the deepest, darkest places around.
Yep.
But you're an accountant.
Yep.
How did you get to feel a sense of calling to be able to serve people in mission as an accountant?
Well, it really started, I guess, Neil, when I was growing up, and we always had, the missionary prayer card stickers on our fridge as kids. And then I was 19 and I'd started working, and I was doing my business degree in accounting part-time. And we had a missionary doctor sharing at our home church, and he was working as a doctor in Nepal, but he said that he spent 80% of his time in the office and 20% of his time on the wards, and what they really needed was accountants and administrators to come and do that work so he could get back to doing doctoring work. And I'd never really thought about the fact that I could be a missionary accountant, and I think that was the seed that was sown in my heart. It was like God gave me a big nudge that evening.
I've heard that one of the most popular professions that's useful on the mission field are people who are school teachers. But I imagine that people who have accounting credentials, accounting experience, can be very useful, particularly for people who are trying to get on their feet and establish business and establish credibility and integrity.
Yep.
Very important profession to be there on the mission field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it's not just in taking care of finances for missionaries and for projects and offices. but also being able to, train people and give input into their lives in how to be good managers of funds that are trusted to them, and how can we be good stewards of God's money. And I think that's a great way of using accounting skills for God's glory in a mission context.
Describe the people that you were working with there in Burkina Faso. Are they, when we talk about, we mentioned poverty, but how do you describe the people?
The people in Burkina are an amazing people, and one of the things that's incredible is that how people with so little can still have a smile on their face. Burkina Faso actually stands for the land of upright men, or the land of people of integrity, and I think that's something that we really found, that people were very welcoming and very friendly, and they are all wanting to learn and progress as well, and often very keen to hear about the message of Jesus. Yeah.
And SIM, which stands for Serving in Mission, an organisation that's been around for a long, long time and well established in so many different contexts in the mission field. They're serving everywhere. Tell us a little about SIM and your connection to them.
Yep. Well, SIM is an international, interdenominational Christian mission organisation, and we serve in many countries around the world, and we really want to see people and prayers and funds mobilised for God's mission. And we're really seeing people of all nations and tribes being brought into God's family, where people are not just coming from Western countries to serve as missionaries, but from other countries around the world to make disciples of Jesus where he's least known. And SIM's got a real passion for reaching the unreached, and for many years we've been involved with medical work and Bible schools and translation and lots of other things, and we really want to see that the people don't miss out on the chance of hearing who Jesus is in the world.
Well, the website for SIM is sim.org.au. Mal Watts is our guest. He's been serving with SIM 15 years in the West African nation of Burkina Faso. Stay with us, Mal, because I'm interested to just know how your family coped with being in one of the poorest countries in the world. We'll be back with some more in just a short while.
Thanks, Neil.
We're taking some time to talk about missionary endeavours in some of the poorest places around the world. Mal Watts is our guest. He's been serving with SIM in the West African nation of Burkina Faso. And that's where he was raising his family. We're talking through issues when you're in one of the poorest countries in the world, and we discussed the fact that Burkina Faso is rated 183 out of 188. In other words, one of the poorest nations on earth on the Human Development Index. And SIM has a wonderful work going there in Burkina Faso. Mal Watts is with us. Mal, tell me about raising a family in the mission field's conditions that you were living in Burkina Faso.
It's interesting, Neil, because we've spent most of our married life and raising family time actually in Burkina Faso, so it's really what seems normal to us. But I think one of the key things is that our girls both went to a French school. Our first daughter was 7 weeks old when we arrived in Burkina after language school, and our second daughter was born there. So they both actually see Burkina Faso as home. So they got very used to living in a place where you wear flip-flops all the time and seeing lots of different cultures. And I think, in many ways, making friendships with local people was key for our family in living in that sort of a context. It was really quite normal in many ways.
We talk about the culture shock of Aussies going to a place like Burkina Faso in West Africa, but when you bring the children home, it's like this alternate culture shock coming back the other way, isn't it? So your children, now just getting into teenage years, how easy is it for them to actually come back into our Australian context?
It's been very hard, to be honest, Neil, because our girls, have had such a wide exposure to so many things, and they've seen poverty and had friends who are hungry and living in, shantytown type situations. So for them, seeing, particularly kids in their classes who don't know much more than their little suburb, and yet they've seen the world, they've found it very hard to adapt to people who don't know and don't understand. And I think the girls have, found it difficult too that everyone has so much here, and often we can not realise how spoilt and fortunate we are when lots of parts of the world don't have a lot.
I'm sure they've got their own stories to tell
Certainly.
with new friends that they'll make back here on Australian soil.
Yes.
Now, being an accountant and working in mission, the sorts of responsibilities you would have had day to day, really, I guess you were keeping the mission functioning in a really orderly way. Is that the way you were working?
Very much so. I was actually their first full-time qualified accountant to come and be their mission finance manager. And, you work in finance in some organisations and you have a very narrow part of it, but it was very much a multi-skilled position, everything from cash to management reporting to internal auditing to management reporting. It's a key role and, it was a very busy role but very rewarding as well.
I suspect very important, actually, for mission organisations that work in all sorts of different mission contexts to make sure that everything is, all those I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed and everything is kept accountably well in that level of integrity that I guess people who give to an organisation like SIM would expect.
Yeah, that's very much the case now that, we have a real responsibility in looking after donors and donor intent and then ensuring that money is spent not just in the project or the situation it was allocated to, but done in a God-honouring way. And I think we're also responsible not only to the Lord, but to the countries where we're hosts, basically, in being able to attest to the fact that the money that is coming in is being spent in the right way and it's benefiting the people of that country in the best way possible.
Tell us about the practical ministry work of SIM and areas that you were involved in. I imagine there must be a lot of testimonies of just how the Word of God and the Gospel goes out and transforms people's lives. How do you reflect on those sorts of issues when people talk to you about how successful the work is in Burkina Faso?
Yeah, it's very much the case. I mean, there's so many stories that I could tell, and I think, it can be little stories of individual people who've come to know the Lord. One story that impacts me very much is a little blind girl who lived in a bush location who was discarded by her family, but she was brought to one of the projects that we run there for handicapped kids and blind kids, and she learnt to read Braille and to write Braille. And then not so long ago, she was able to speak at the 25th anniversary of that centre. And the American ambassador came to visit that town, and he heard about her and invited her to come to the U.S. Embassy in the capital city of Burkina Faso, and she actually shared at one of the big ceremonies there. So it's really looking at the way God transforms lives. And she was able to share her testimony of how she came to know Jesus through the ministry and people of that centre.
And of course, people coming to know Jesus, just the tip of the iceberg, because discipleship is such an important issue. And I imagine that SIM, in the context there that you were a part of, was very deeply and heavily involved in discipleship.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very much the case. And, one of my ministries outside of the office, that was my official role in the office as the accountant. But I was also involved in a local African church, and the church that we attended had a youth centre where university students could come and study at night because a lot of them didn't have lights, and it was an opportunity to get alongside people. And one young man that I spent a lot of time with who was 16 when I met him is a young man called Michel, and I worked with him over many years in just sharing life and encouraging him and working through Bible studies with him. And now he's a young married man working in our guest house and involved in his local church. So it shows that inputting over a long time can really reap rewards for the kingdom.
Certainly there's personal sacrifice in going to the mission field, and you'd be aware that there's a lot of what some people call missionary tourism, where people are going on short-term visits to various mission fields around the world. And those things have to be good, and they have certainly a positive spin-off for those nations that people are visiting. What is it, though, in your mind, Mal, and you must think on this sort of thing, to be able to commit yourself to 15 years on the mission fields, you really do have to feel a sense of a call from God to actually do that. It's bigger than just a missionary tourism visit, isn't it? Yeah,
it's very much the case. And someone described it to me like this when we were living in Burkina. They actually said to us, you guys, you unpacked your bags when you came, didn't you? And I think that describes it, that, you're letting go of your home culture to fully invest in a local culture. And when we went back for our second term of service in Burkina Faso, local people would say to us, "Oh, you came back." And I think that was an amazing testimony to them when they know all that the good things, that exist in a place like Australia, that we're willing to come back to a place like Burkina. And I think, short-term mission is a great thing for giving people insight, but I think too that when people commit to come and stay and live and invest is when relationships really get made.
What do you do to prepare for some of the hardships that you do face when you go and live in a context like Burkina Faso?
Well, with SIM, you do a lot of training and we have orientation programs. I think one of the things is being willing to understand and realise that, things aren't going to be easy, and then we do need to trust the Lord for it. But I think it's also being aware that we need to make friends locally, and that really helps to understand some of the hardships that you're facing, and to be part of a team, which I think SIM does really well, that you're part of a field team and have people around you who you can go and talk to and feel supported. I think, Neil, one of the things for us was being involved in that local church community where we weren't seen as the white family, we were just other members of the church, and that really helped us to overcome difficult issues and talk to local people and understand it from their perspective.
I suspect that when you are thinking about pursuing some service for God in mission in a long-term sense, as you say, SIM spends a fair bit of time preparing people, and there must be people who are making contact or knocking on the door saying, is this for me? And you say there's a fairly extensive training process that prepares you for what you're likely to find on the mission field. I guess once you go through that sort of preparation, you approach the missionary call with a level of confidence.
Yeah, I think to an extent that's true. I think also that it does come back to that whole thing of committing yourself to the Lord and trusting Him, because you don't really know how you're going to react to a place until you get there. We try and equip people with skills on how to manage in a cross-cultural situation. But I think in many ways, a lot of the people who I worked with, expatriate missionaries, would say often that, if I wasn't called by the Lord to do this ministry, I doubt I would have stayed. And I think that's what it really comes down to, that God's called me and equipped me for it, and I'm going to be His instrument in this place.
And Mel, have you got any idea how many missionaries might be out in the field who are serving with SIM?
There's around 1,800 missionaries around the world, and I think it's over 50 countries where we work now with SIM.
Well, that's just so exciting to hear of that number of missionaries serving, and that's just one missionary organisation. We're talking about SIM, and I want to give the website because there might be listeners who are saying, well, this is what perhaps God is calling me to, and I'll give that contact address there. So it's sim.org.au. So easy to remember website, sim.org.au. Mal Watts was serving in Burkina Faso, he and his wife and his 2 daughters, for 15 years and back on Australian shores. And Mal, just a pleasure hearing your insights, and welcome home. And I know that God's got good things for you as you settle into life here in Australia. Thanks so much for being with us today on 2020.
No worries. Thanks so much, Neil. God bless.
Before you go, thanks for listening.
There's lots more great audio on demand, or you can listen to us live at visionradio.org.au.
And remember, Vision is listener supported. Your donation,
large or small,
will help us continue connecting faith to life for hundreds of thousands of people across Australia and around the world.
Learn more or donate today at visionradio.org.au.